Guys, I'd like to thank you for watching. Thank you for tuning in. Today I'd like to talk about a little bit of a different product. So mostly everybody knows Cisco, but today I'd like to talk about Cisco Meraki. So Meraki was a company that Cisco acquired about 8 or 9 years ago. When they originally came out, they built a solid wireless product, and then they started to branch out a little bit. They developed a firewall, then they developed switches, then they've developed more things like phones and cameras and products like that. And today I'd like to talk to you a little bit about the firewall. So here is here's the MX portfolio here. So here you can see this is it shows your network here, and then you've got all kinds of different options. So within your network, you can see all the clients. You can actually take a packet capture. You can see all the logs that have generated. You can so let's go under clients. So under clients, you can see, like I've got a couple TVs and a couple phones and whatnot. You can see all the information associated with those, the operating system, how much data they've used, when the last time the device was seen on the network, any policies associated with those devices, and then their IP addresses. If you want to take a packet capture, you can see basically you just specify what device you want to do a packet capture from. You can specify the interface, so if you want it's connected to the internet, or if you're having like drops on your local LAN, you specify that, or if you've got cellular or even VPN, you can do that as well. You can specify, you can either view the output directly below, or you can actually use it in Wireshark. Specify duration and then how much data you're actually going to capture, and then do all kinds of filters. So that's a pretty cool feature. Go down to your event log, you can see any types of events, and there's just absolutely tons of things that you can find in here, detailed information, so that's very useful. Go over here to the floor maps. Of course, I'm not using my real address here, but you can actually create a floor plan and specify like name and location, and then actually have a blueprint of that floor plan, and then specify where your devices are at in that floor, on the floor, so that way if you ever need to go back to it, you can easily just go do that. So anyway, you can set up all your administration and whatnot here, add devices and set up alerts, and all that's pretty sweet. But what I want to get into is the actual device itself and what all it does. So you can go over here to the appliance status page. This is like the meat of everything. What's really going on here? You can see, like your IP addresses, if your config is out of date, if it hasn't been updated. Let's see here, the network usage, how much you've actually used over like the last, I think it's like 10 hours. So you say, hey, you had a spike right here at 11 o'clock using 12 megabits per second. So you go to uplink, you get more granular details, whatnot. So within the last couple minutes, something's turned on my network. It's popped up to total usage of 75.06 megabits per second. Suddenly somebody, since download is purple, and somebody's been downloading something that was pretty large, probably just a TV coming on to start streaming, more than likely. You can see the loss, and the loss is very handy. So if you're running an enterprise network, you can look at the loss here and say, oh yeah, if you've got more than one uplink, you got two, they'll actually be, one WAN will be, blue and one will be purple. So you can see which WAN is actually got the most loss and what the latency is on that. So if you've got carrier problems, you can call the carrier and get that resolved while your other one maintains the primary connection. You can specify all kinds of DHCP, or see all your DHCP up here. Specify your location. This is not my real location. Don't live at the Lincoln Memorial. And then you got all kinds of tools. You can ping the internet. You can see what your latency is getting to the internet. ICMP can I reach the .net is 47 milliseconds per second, or I'm sorry, 47 millisecond response time. So just want to cancel that. You can blink the LEDs if you don't know what the device is. Reboot it. You test the throughput. Like on my internet connection, my house, I've got 100 meg download, but I think it's like 20 meg upload. So you're probably going to see 20 megs here. Oh no, you're going to see total 100 meg. I do have a 100 meg connection. I think it's, like I said, 100 by 20. You can trace routes. So if you want to see, how your internet service provider gets to a specific address. If you're having problems like that, you can look that up. You can do DNS lookup and actually look at your ARP table here to see what your devices are and their age on the network. So that's all pretty cool. There's a lot of really handy features built into the tools section. So let's go over here to the route table. The route table, this is going to be, if you're in an enterprise environment, you're going to have tons and tons. So this page is going to be completely full, and you're going to see like green, yellow, red, and whatnot. And you'll probably have, like, if this is at one of your remote locations, you'll probably have 3, 4, 5 different networks at that location, and hopefully they all say green. But if you're having problems with one of those networks, maybe something's happened and maybe you've got a spanning tree problem, and maybe your subnet is red, or your receiving end is blocking that subnet, so now it's red. So this is a good idea, a good thing to check if you're having some issues. So go back up to the security center here. This is going to show you all the security issues that have really happened. So like over the last 2 hours, I've really had no events. For the last day, no events. Last month, no events. I'm sorry, last week, no events. Last month, looks like there's been an issue here. You can go actually dig into inspect this packet, and you can actually see what was in the packet, which is pretty cool. You can tell, the action, so it's blocked, source IP address, and then what actually happened here. So that's a lot of really, really, really good information just right there at your fingertips. And guess what? If you need this, you can export it as a PCAP file. So if you want to investigate it in Wireshark, you can do that. So there's a lot of really, really good tools in here. Next piece is the addresses and VLANs. You can go through, you can set routed mode or pass-through VPN concentrator. So routed mode is basically where that appliance connects directly to the internet. Pass-through or concentrator mode is where it does have an internet connection, but it's using its default route to get to the internet. So you've got another device servicing the internet, but the MX64 or whatever device you have is what your VPN devices at your remote locations are using to service networks. So if you set in VPN concentrator mode, they actually tunnel through the internet to get to each other using Cisco Meraki ports. I think it's UDP port 4500, and there's one more, like can't remember, 8901 maybe. I can't remember off the top of my head. But anyway, client tracking, you want to always track by MAC address, otherwise you'll have some alerts that don't work just quite right. VLANs, you can add new VLANs. You can specify whatever you want. You can add those to a new group policy, create a new group policy there. So you've got to specify the name, the subnet, the IP address that's going to be on the MX, then the VLAN ID for that network. Just like pretty much any other device that you have. Here, I'm totally against VLAN 1. However, that's how I've got this device set up, and it does work because that is the only network that I am running. And you can go in and you can change these. You can set them as trunks or access ports or whatever you want. Here I've just done a trunk with native VLAN 1. That works just fine for my purposes. You can specify DHCP networks. So So you'll run a DHCP server, specify pretty much whatever you want to within here, just like any other DHCP server, except for the service runs on the firewall itself. You can say you don't want to, or you want to relay it to another DHCP server. Specify release time. These are always nice if you want a guest network where you just want a release to be 30 minutes or a day, whatever. And this is a really cool feature right here. DNS name servers. So use OpenDNS. So they're actually going to forward, because you have the Meraki product, they're going to forward your DNS request to OpenDNS if you specify it. That's really cool, because if it's really something bad, it'll block it. OpenDNS will block that. So that's always a handy feature. Boot options, not so sure about that. I guess you could configure Pixie boot. I've not done any of those. I have previous life, not with VMX, but other solutions for Pixie booting, just standard DHCP Pixie boot options within like Windows DHCP server. But I haven't tested this out, so I'm not too familiar with that. I'm sure it would work. Basically, just specify the next server and then the file name that you're trying to boot from, and it just Pixie boots across the network. Granted that you have enough bandwidth between the two. And you specify DHCP options. This is handy if you have like a phone system where you need to specify a TFTP name server to boot your phone from, or router options next hop, or DHCP relay DHCP option there, and that might actually do that for you there. Then you can reserve these. So this is really handy if you're in an enterprise environment. You say I want 1 through 10 and 25 through 30 to be reserved. I don't want anybody to have those, or I don't want 245 through 254. I don't want anybody to have those either. So you can actually go in and make those addresses reserved, and you can actually create static IP address entries for devices that you want to have the same IP address. So basically, this is all the same functionality of a standard DHCP server. It's just all pretty well integrated together. Here, firewall rules. You can have outbound rules. I wish that this part was a little bit beefed up, but it's not terrible. But here, I'll show you the issue here in just a second. So inbound rules: traffic will be restricted to the services and forwarding rules configured below. So you can have outbound rules here, but default is anything's allowed, right? So you configure your outbound rules, but then forwarding rules, add a layer 7 forwarding rule. Well, there's really not, there's forwarding rules here. So you can port forward, you can do a one-to-one NAT, or a one-to-many NAT. Typically, I'll just do a port forwarding rule if there's something that needs to be accessed from the internet internally. But you've got to be really careful with that. The benefit there is if you do a one-to-one NAT, basically every port is forwarded from one-to-one from that one network outside internally, forwarding every port across that. There's really not a way to specify only allow these ports, and that's where port forwarding allows you to forward that single port from external to internal and not allow the rest of those ports. So if you wanted a file server on 443, unfortunately, if it's a web server, you'll have to do allow any LNIP, say it's 192.168.1.1 public port, any protocol, TCP, UDP, probably just going to be TCP, uplink, both, and say web server, right? This one's going to fail because I don't have that in my networks, but that's how you would configure a port forwarding rule. You want to, I just did this a few minutes ago, but IP source address spoofing protection, turn that to blocked. That's a new feature that came out a couple months ago. I just haven't turned it on for this device. Okay, so let's go back to site-to-site VPN. This is the primary reason for this. One of the nicest features of this product is being able to create a hub network. So this is pretty cool because you can create a hub, and then you got to go back to that address as a VLAN, set that to a VPN concentrator, or you don't have to. You can specify a layer 3, but you create a hub network. That way you can allow other Meraki VPNs and even third parties to connect to you through this. But basically, here's the options you can set. These are your networks. So if you have more networks created, they'll be shown here, and you can say, "Oh, I want to use the VPN." Sure. Here, non-Meraki peers. So you'd have to specify like a name for that. Public IP, private subnets. You have to create an IPsec policy. So you can actually connect directly to Amazon, Azure, or others. So like Amazon. That's what Amazon is using. Azure is using this, and that's nice. AS256, SHA-1, auth. I'm not a fan of this. Should really be up in the 10s to 20s on the Diffie-Hellman group for that. But anyway, you can specify phase 1 and phase 2 for that. Encryption does go to 256. I do like that. Authentication does do SHA-1, that's nice, but the PFS group I'm still not a fan of. So for you can create outbound rules if you want to, and site-to-site inbound rules as well. If you want to block certain things or create policies around those, it's pretty handy, and the spoke option will pretty much works the same way, except for you have to have a hub in your network to connect to a spoke. Cancel. If you want to create client VPN, you can go in here and create client VPN. If you have Active Directory, you can specify Active Directory settings, whatever you want to do there. SD-WAN and traffic shaping. This is pretty handy. So if you want to specify, you have a primary uplink. Say you have a remote location with a gig by gig, and you have a 10 by 10 there, and say your gig is on WAN 1 and your 10 is on 2. Well, you probably wouldn't want to load balance those because your gig's going to be able to handle everything. So you would want to set load balancing to disabled, and then set your primary uplink to WAN 1. So the primary uplink will actually send all of your management traffic across the primary uplink, regardless of if you are load balancing or not. You can create VPN traffic policies. If you want to add a policy here, this is actually a pretty new feature. But there's all kinds of stuff that you can specify. You can create, whatever, best for VoIP, global preference, whatever you want to save in there for your uplink policy. Traffic shaping rules pretty much work the same way. Excuse me. You can create traffic shaping rules, if you want something specific to use one of those rules, and it'll do whatever you got the DHCP tagging set for. You just select whatever you want to set in here, and you can go through and configure that. Threat protection, this one's pretty biggie. This is where you set the IPS. So default is disabled on the AMP. You want to enable that, and you whitelist. If you want to whitelist files or URLs, you can. IDS, you've got 3 different options: disabled, detection, and prevention. Detection is pretty much an IDS, and set up for prevention as an IPS. The rule set, though, you have 3 options: connectivity, balance, and security. I recommend setting it to security, and if you need to whitelist something, then whitelist it. That way you're blocking everything, and then you just allow what you have to if it fails. I've never really had a problem with anything like that happening. You can do URL filtering on these as well, block certain categories like botnets and anything illegal, keyloggers, malware sites, whatnot. You can do web search. You can do YouTube content filtering. You can set the YouTube restriction level, so that's handy if you have kids. You can specify all of those things. You can block certain URLs and specify URL patterns if you want to, like all.youtube.com or youtube.com/all or something like that. Gotta block those. Really, we're getting down to the last little section here, but access controls. So you specify the VLAN here, and you can specify what you want. If you want them to be able to sign on with a Radius server or Facebook login, or even third-party credentials. That way they have to put in credentials in order to gain access to your network. So there's really a lot of cool stuff you can do. Like you can enable walled garden for certain network ranges, and that's basically where if you don't authenticate, then they have a range that doesn't have access to anything. They can't see anything or do anything. They're just basically just there. That's really nice to have. And you can specify all this stuff. You know, what if your internet's unreachable? Then what happens if you can't get access to your web server or to the Meraki Cloud Controller? So what if it's disconnected? What do you do? So you can set any of those options here if you want. You know, you can set all this captive portal strength. You know, block all access until sign-on is complete, or just allow non-HTTP traffic prior to sign-on. Allow domains, accepted credentials, Google. I don't know if there's probably another way to add other options in there, but anyway, that's pretty sweet. You can specify your splash page here. You know, you can customize a lot of this to make it look the way you want to. You just have to upload your logos. So I have to access control. So that part of access control, so you have to enable the splash page, and then you can go in and create this here. And then your wireless concentrator. If you want your MX to be a wireless concentrator, then you can configure that if you want to. But I would recommend, in most cases, you don't need to specify your MX as a wireless concentrator. The wireless just typically works pretty good on its own. So anyway, I'm a pretty big fan of the MX series. There's a lot of really good tools in it. If you're new to the networking world, it's very good to kind of get your feet wet before you start digging into CLI and working on actual Cisco configurations on switches and routers and, you know, firewalls. It's really handy. Things are very easy to configure and manage. The problem with this solution is, and it's really not even a problem, but if you ever plan on going anywhere else that doesn't have Meraki, you have to understand the concepts of how networks work in order to use these tools appropriately. So anyway, I'd like to thank you guys for watching. You know, if you're not already a subscriber, I hope you've liked my content. You know, please just smash that like button, smash that subscribe button. That way, when I create new material, you'll be able to come view it with me. Hope you like it. I've got all my gear, stuff that I use. I put it in the description box. You know, if you need anything, you guys want to see new videos on certain things. You know, I'm planning on doing one on wireless, maybe one on switches, but just shoot me a comment. I try to respond as fast as I can to those. Just let me know. Again, if you don't care, thanks for watching. Appreciate you subscribing. Have a great rest of your day.